He wasn't supposed to see him again. The clock on the wall ticks with a hollow, indifferent rhythm, each second echoing louder than the last in the sterile stillness of the execution chamber. And Daniel Hayes sits with his hands resting loosely on his knees, palms open as if he has already surrendered everything a man can lose, the faint hum of fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over his weathered face, carving deeper lines into a man who once stood tall in desert heat, with a rifle slung across his shoulder and a loyal shadow at his side. But now there is no battlefield, no command, no horizon, only four walls, a reinforced door, and the quiet understanding that time has narrowed into something fragile and finite, measured not in years or missions, but in minutes. And yet his eyes, gray and steady, are not fixed on the clock. They are fixed somewhere far beyond this room, somewhere that smells of dust and wind and cordite, somewhere that still holds the sound of boots in sync and the soft, controlled breathing of a German shepherd waiting for a signal, waiting for him. And when the guard shifts his weight near the door, clearing his throat as if to remind the world that procedure must continue, Daniel finally speaks, his voice low but unshaken. "Bring me my dog." And the words linger in the air longer than they should, like something sacred that doesn't quite belong in a place designed for endings. The guard hesitates, just for a fraction of a second, before masking it with routine indifference. "That's not how this works," he replies. But Daniel doesn't argue, doesn't raise his voice. He simply nods once as if he expected nothing else, because men like him have learned long ago that hope is not something you demand. It's something you carry quietly, even when it cuts, even when it has no reason to exist. And somewhere down the hall, a metal door closes with a distant clang that rolls through the building like thunder swallowed by concrete. And Daniel closes his eyes for a moment, just a moment. And in that darkness there is movement, memory flickering like old film, sand whipping against his skin, the sharp scent of fuel, the weight of responsibility pressing down harder than any pack he ever carried. And beside him, always beside him, a pair of amber eyes scanning the world with a vigilance no human could replicate. Rex, the name forming silently behind his lips, a name he hasn't spoken out loud in years, not since the day everything fractured, not since the moment the world he trusted slipped just enough for truth to fall through the cracks. And when his eyes open again, the room feels smaller, tighter, like it is closing in around a story that was never fully told. And the doctor standing near the corner pretends to review a clipboard but keeps glancing up, watching Daniel with a quiet curiosity that borders on unease. Because there is something different about a man who asks for a dog instead of a lawyer, something that doesn't fit the script, something that suggests there are pieces missing. And Daniel leans back slightly in the chair, exhaling slow, steady, as if preparing himself not for what is coming, but for what might not. Because deep down, beneath the discipline and the silence, there is a single fragile thread still holding, a belief that somewhere beyond policies and locked doors and final procedures, a bond built in fire and trust might still find its way back to him, even here, even now, even at the very edge of everything. The hallway outside his room smells faintly of disinfectant and old steel, a scent that clings to the back of the throat and refuses to leave. And as the hours stretch thin, Daniel Hayes finds himself drifting not forward but backward, pulled into a time when the air carried something entirely different, something alive, something that tasted like dust and sun and the quiet tension of a world that could change in a heartbeat. And there he is again, standing under a sky so wide it almost feels endless, boots planted in dry earth, the low hum of distant generators blending with the restless whisper of wind sweeping across the outpost. And beside him, always within reach, stands Rex, a German shepherd with a coat that catches the light in shades of sable and shadow, his ears alert, his body still but never relaxed, as if the world itself is a puzzle he is determined to solve before it can break apart. And Daniel remembers the first time their eyes met, not as handler and asset, but as something quieter, something deeper, a recognition that did not need words, because Rex did not simply follow commands. He understood them, he felt them, and in moments when the noise of the mission faded just enough, Daniel would kneel beside him, fingers pressing into the thick fur along his neck, grounding himself in the simple certainty that some bonds are not assigned, they are formed. And those bonds had carried them through long nights and longer days, through stretches of silence where every shadow seemed to breathe and every step had to be measured. And there was one morning, clear and sharp, when the horizon burned gold and the world seemed almost peaceful, when Rex stopped without warning, his body going rigid, his gaze fixed on something unseen, and Daniel had learned by then not to question, not to rush, only to trust, because Rex did not react without reason, and that trust had saved them more times than he could count, moments where instinct bridged the gap between danger and survival. Though survival never felt like victory. Not really. Not when every mission left something behind. A piece of certainty, a piece of innocence, a piece of the man he used to be. And yet through all of it, Rex remained constant, a steady presence in a world that rarely offered anything steady at all. And at night, when the base quieted and the stars stretched across the sky like scattered signals no one could decode, Daniel would sit just outside the barracks, dog tags resting cold against his chest, while Rex lay beside him, head resting on his boot, breathing slow and even, a rhythm that somehow made everything else feel manageable, as if the chaos could be held at bay for just a little longer, and he would speak to him then, not in commands, but in fragments of thought, things he never said to anyone else, about home, about the weight of responsibility, about the fear that never quite left, and Rex would listen in the only way he knew how, silent, present, unwavering. And in those quiet exchanges, something unspoken took root, something stronger than orders or duty, something that would outlast the desert, outlast the missions, outlast even the truth as the world would later twist it. And as the memory begins to fade, replaced once more by the cold, controlled air of the present, Daniel exhales slowly, his fingers tightening just slightly, as if holding on to something that cannot be seen. Because in a place where everything has been reduced to procedure and finality, the memory of a dog who once stood between him and the unknown is the only thing that still feels real, the only thing that has not been taken. And somewhere deep within that memory, there lingers a question that has never been answered, not fully, not honestly, a moment that fractured everything that came after, a moment when trust was tested in a way neither of them could have understood at the time. And as the distant sound of footsteps echoes faintly through the corridor, Daniel opens his eyes again, not with fear, but with a quiet resolve, because if there is even the smallest chance that Rex will walk through that door, then the past is not finished yet, and neither is he. It does not break all at once, not in a way that anyone can point to and say this was the moment everything changed. It happens quietly, almost politely, like a door closing somewhere down a long hallway. And Daniel remembers that day with a clarity that feels heavier than any chain. The sky was overcast, low and gray, pressing down on the base with a silence that felt wrong. The kind of silence that makes even seasoned men pause without knowing why. And Rex had been different that morning. Not restless, not anxious, but focused in a way that pulled Daniel's attention again and again. His ears twitching at sounds no one else noticed, his body angled slightly, as if listening to something just out of reach. And when the call came in, routine at first, just another assignment, Daniel clipped the leash with practiced ease, his fingers brushing briefly against Rex's collar. A familiar gesture, grounding, steady. And they moved out together as they always did, step for step, breath for breath, into a world that rarely gave warnings before it shifted, and at first, nothing seemed out of place, the terrain familiar, the path marked by tracks they had seen 100 times before. But Rex slowed, just slightly, then stopped, his body lowering, muscles coiled not in fear but in certainty, and Daniel followed his lead, because that was the unspoken rule between them. Trust first, questions later. And it was then that Daniel noticed the man standing further ahead, not one of their unit, not someone who belonged to the rhythm of the place, his posture too rigid, his eyes too still. And there was something in the air, something faint but unmistakable, a scent that did not belong, and Rex knew it before anyone else did, a low sound building in his chest, not a bark, not a warning, but something deeper, something that spoke of recognition and alarm. And Daniel raised a hand instinctively, signaling pause, his gaze narrowing as he tried to piece together what did not fit. But the moment stretched thin, fragile, And then it snapped, not with chaos, but with confusion, voices overlapping, orders called out too quickly, too sharply. And in the middle of it all, Rex did not move toward the noise. He moved toward the man, direct, unwavering, as if pulled by something stronger than command. And Daniel felt it then, that shift, that fracture, the instant when instinct and protocol no longer aligned. And he called out, his voice firm, steady, but Rex did not stop, because whatever he sensed had already crossed a line no human could see, and what followed was not something Daniel could fully explain later, not in the way they wanted him to, not in reports or statements or quiet rooms filled with questions that sounded more like conclusions, because by the time it was over, the narrative had already begun to form around him, shaped by those who had not been there, those who had not seen the way Rex reacted, the way he hesitated for just a fraction of a second before acting, as if waiting for confirmation that never came. And Daniel stood in the aftermath of something he could not undo, something he could not fully understand, and all he knew was that the trust he had built over years had been questioned in a single moment, twisted into doubt, into suspicion, into something that no longer resembled the truth he carried. And Rex, his partner, his constant, had been taken from him not with anger, but with quiet finality, led away by hands that did not know him, by voices that did not understand what had been lost. And Daniel had tried to speak, to explain, but the words felt too small, too fragile against the weight of what others believed they saw. And in the end, it was not the noise or the confusion that stayed with him. It was the silence that followed, the kind that settles in after everything has already been decided. And now, sitting in a room where time has narrowed to a single path, Daniel feels that same silence pressing in again, heavier, closer, because the moment that changed everything was never truly heard, never truly seen. And somewhere out there, the one witness who could have bridged that gap had been turned into a stranger, a memory locked behind orders and distance. And yet, even now, even here, Daniel cannot shake the feeling that Rex had not acted alone, that there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface of that day, something waiting to be understood, if only the right moment, the right connection, could bring it back into the light. The days that followed did not come with noise or chaos. They came with paperwork, with quiet rooms and measured voices, with men in pressed uniforms asking questions that sounded rehearsed and answers that never seemed to land where they were meant to. And Daniel sat through it all with the same steady posture he had carried through years of service. But inside, something had shifted. Something fragile had been placed under a weight it was never meant to carry. And every time he spoke Rex's name, the room seemed to tighten, as if even that connection had become something inconvenient, something better left unspoken. And they showed him reports, statements, fragments of a story that no longer matched the one he remembered, details that felt close enough to truth to be convincing, yet far enough to leave a hollow space that no explanation could fill. And when he tried to describe what Rex had sensed, the way the dog had reacted before anything else unfolded, the way that instinct had guided him without hesitation, the men across the table exchanged glances that carried more doubt than curiosity, because instinct was not evidence, and trust, no matter how strong, could not be filed or signed or stamped into something official. And so the narrative moved forward without him, reshaped by those who needed it to be simpler, cleaner, easier to close. And in that version, Daniel became the question instead of the answer, the uncertainty instead of the certainty he had once been. And Rex, his partner, was reassigned, relocated, removed from the story as if distance alone could erase what they had built. And Daniel remembered the last time he saw him, not on the field, not in motion, but behind a barrier, held by a handler who did not know him, who did not understand the quiet language that passed between them even in stillness. And Rex had looked at him, not with confusion, not with fear, but with a kind of searching that cut deeper than any accusation, as if trying to reconcile the presence of the man he trusted with the absence of everything that had once defined them. And Daniel had stepped forward then, just one step, enough to feel the pull of recognition without being allowed to reach it. And he had spoken, not loudly, not desperately, but with the same calm tone he had always used, the tone that carried command without force. "Stay," he had said, a word that had once meant safety, meant patience, meant that everything would hold together just a little longer, and Rex had obeyed. Because that was what he did, because that was who he was. But in that obedience there was something else, something heavier, a restraint that did not belong to the moment, but to everything surrounding it. And Daniel had wanted to say more, to bridge the distance that had been placed between them. But the opportunity passed as quickly as it came, replaced by procedure, by movement, by the quiet finality of separation, and after that, the days blurred into each other, the world narrowing not just in space, but in possibility, until the only thing that remained clear was the absence, the space where Rex should have been, the silence, where his presence used to steady the edges of everything. And now, back in this room where time has once again become something measured and controlled, Daniel feels that same absence pressing in. But beneath it, there is something else, something that refuses to settle, a memory that does not align with the version of events that has been accepted, a detail that lingers just out of reach, like a scent carried on the wind that Rex would have recognized instantly. And as footsteps echo faintly beyond the door, Daniel lifts his head slightly, not in anticipation of what has been promised, but in quiet defiance of what has already been decided. Because somewhere between the past they shared and the present that has confined him, there is still a thread unbroken, still a truth not fully uncovered. And if Rex walks through that door, even for a moment, then that thread might be enough to pull everything else back into the light. The sound comes first, not loud, not urgent, just the measured click of a lock turning somewhere beyond the reinforced door, and it cuts through the stillness with a precision that makes Daniel lift his head before he even realizes he has moved. Because in a place where every second has begun to feel identical, even the smallest change carries weight, and the guard near the wall straightens slightly, exchanging a glance with the doctor that lingers a fraction too long to be routine, and for a moment nothing happens, the silence stretching thin again, until the door opens just enough to let in a breath of air that does not belong to this room. Air that carries something faint, something almost forgotten, something that does not smell like steel or antiseptic. And Daniel's chest tightens before his mind can catch up, because there are some things the body remembers before the world has a chance to explain them. And then he hears it, soft at first, the subtle shift of weight against the floor, the controlled rhythm of pause stepping with purpose. And time does not stop, but it slows, pulling every movement into focus as the figure appears in the doorway. Tall, composed, a handler holding a leash that is not pulled tight, but not slack either. And at the end of it stands Rex, older now, broader through the shoulders, his sable coat darker along the spine, touched with faint streaks of gray near the muzzle that speak of years past, of duties carried beyond the life they once shared. And for a moment, just a moment, Daniel forgets where he is, because the distance between memory and reality collapses into a single breath, and Rex steps forward, guided but not forced, his posture controlled, professional, the discipline of training evident in every measured movement, and his eyes sweep the room not with curiosity but with assessment, as if cataloging each presence, each scent, each shift in the air, until they reach Daniel. And then something changes, not outwardly, not in a way anyone else might notice, but Daniel sees it. A flicker so brief it could be dismissed as nothing, accepted as not nothing. It is recognition fighting through layers of time and conditioning. And Daniel does not move, does not speak, because he understands that this moment is fragile, that any sudden motion could break it. And the handler gives a quiet command, guiding Rex a few steps closer, stopping at a distance that feels both impossibly small and unbearably wide. And Rex stands there, his body still, his gaze fixed, and yet there is no immediate reaction, no rush forward, no sound. Only a silence that presses harder than anything that came before. And Daniel feels it then, the weight of doubt creeping in, not from others, but from within. Because time changes things, because separation reshapes even the strongest bonds. And for the first time since the door opened, uncertainty settles into his chest, heavy and unwelcome, and he swallows once, slow, steady, before finally speaking, his voice quiet, controlled, carrying none of the urgency that pulses beneath it. Rex. The name leaves his lips like something sacred, something that has waited too long to be said out loud. And the room seems to hold its breath. The Guard shifts slightly. The doctor lowers his clipboard without realizing it. And Rex does not move. Not yet. His ears twitching once, his head tilting almost imperceptibly, as if processing a sound buried beneath. Layers of training and time. And Daniel takes a small breath, steadying himself, because he knows this is not about commands anymore, not about authority. It is about something deeper, something that cannot be forced, and he lifts his hand slowly, palm open, the same gesture he used years ago, a signal not of control but of trust, and for a moment longer, nothing happens, the silence stretching to its breaking point, until Rex shifts his weight forward just slightly, one palm moving ahead of the other, hesitant but deliberate, as if stepping across a boundary no one else in the room can see. And in that single movement, something begins to return, not fully, not yet, but enough to change the air, enough to remind Daniel that some bonds do not disappear. They wait, quiet and patient, for the right moment to be remembered. The movement is small, almost invisible to anyone who does not know what to look for, but Daniel sees it, feels it. The shift in Rex's posture as memory begins to surface through layers of training and time, and he keeps his hand steady, palm open, fingers relaxed, not commanding, not demanding, just offering, because he understands now that this moment cannot be rushed, that whatever stands between them must be crossed willingly, step by step, breath by breath, and Rex takes another slow step forward, his nails barely making a sound against the floor, his head slightly lowered as if listening not to the room, but to something deeper, something older, something that has been waiting beneath the surface, and the handler tightens his grip just slightly, not enough to restrain, but enough to remind, a subtle tension that does not go unnoticed, and Daniel's eyes flicker to it for just a second before returning to Rex. Because he knows that hesitation, he knows that conflict, the pull, between obedience and instinct, and he inhales slowly, drawing in the sterile air that still carries that faint trace of something real, something familiar, and then he speaks again, softer this time, not a name, not yet, but a phrase, one that had never been written down, never taught in a formal setting, something that belonged only to the two of them. Easy, partner. The words fall gently into the space between them, carrying with them years of shared moments, quiet nights, steady hands, trust built in silence rather than spoken instruction, and for a fraction of a second, nothing changes, the room holding its breath as if waiting for confirmation that this is real. And then Rex's ears lift, not sharply, not in alert, but in recognition, his body stiffening not with tension, but with something closer to realization, and his gaze sharpens, locking onto Daniel in a way it has not since he entered the room, and the handler feels it too, the shift, the subtle break in control, and he murmurs a quiet correction under his breath, but it comes too late, because Rex is no longer responding to him, not entirely, not in the way he was trained to, and Daniel sees it unfolding, the moment when memory overrides instruction, when something deeper than command begins to take hold, and he lowers his hand just slightly, not to withdraw it, but to change the signal, to bring it closer to what it used to be, the way he would reach out after a long patrol, after a mission that left them both worn and silent, and his voice follows, steady, unwavering, left flank. The words hang in the air like a key turning in a lock, subtle, precise, unmistakable, and Rex reacts, not dramatically, not with sudden motion, but with a shift so profound it changes everything. His head tilts, his body angles just slightly, his weight redistributing as if preparing for something that only he understands, and a low sound escapes him, not a growl, not a bark, but something in between, something that carries confusion and recognition at the same time, and Daniel feels his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope, because that phrase, that signal, was never part of standard training. It was something they developed together, something born out of necessity and trust, something no one else would know, and the room begins to feel smaller, the air heavier, as if the truth itself is pressing against the walls, waiting for the right moment to break through, and Rex takes another step, closer now, close enough that the distance no longer feels impossible, and his eyes, those same amber eyes that once scanned the horizon for threats no one else could see, are fixed entirely on Daniel, searching, piecing together fragments that had been scattered by time and separation, and Daniel does not move, does not rush forward, because he knows that this is not about closing the gap physically. It is about something far more fragile, something that must come back on its own. And then Rex stops, just a few feet away, his chest rising and falling a little faster now, his focus unwavering. And for a moment, the entire room fades into the background. The guard, the doctor, the handler, all of it dissolving into silence, leaving only the two of them suspended in a moment that feels both impossibly long and heartbreakingly brief. And in that stillness, something shifts again, deeper this time, something that cannot be undone, because memory has found its way back, and it is not leaving. It happens in a breath, in that fragile space between doubt and certainty, when something unseen finally gives way, and Rex moves, not cautiously now, not held back by hesitation, but with a sudden, undeniable pull that breaks through every layer that had been placed over him. And the leash goes taut for a fraction of a second before slipping just enough, just long enough, and he crosses the remaining distance in 2 silent steps, stopping inches from Daniel, as if the world itself has narrowed to this single point of contact. And for a moment neither of them moves, because recognition is not always loud. It is not always immediate. Sometimes it arrives like a wave that builds beneath the surface before it finally reaches the shore, and Daniel feels it in the way Rex's breath changes, in the way his body no longer holds that rigid, professional stillness, but softens, just slightly, just enough to let something real come through. And then it happens. Rex lowers his head and presses it gently against Daniel's outstretched hand, a motion so simple it could be overlooked, but in that touch there is no confusion left, no distance, no separation, only the quiet, undeniable truth of what they were and still are. And Daniel exhales a breath he did not realize he had been holding for years, his fingers curling into the thick fur at Rex's neck, grounding himself in something that cannot be taken, something that cannot be rewritten. And the room changes, not physically, not in any way that can be measured, but in the way silence fills it, in the way every person present feels the weight of what they are witnessing without fully understanding it. And Rex lets out a low sound, soft and broken, not a command, not a signal, but something closer to emotion, something that does not belong to training manuals or protocols. And Daniel leans forward slightly, his forehead resting briefly against Rex's, eyes closed, allowing the moment to settle, to become real, because for the first time since everything fell apart, there is no question, no doubt, no voice telling him that what he remembers is wrong. And Rex shifts again, his body pressing closer, not in urgency, but in presence, as if making up for time that cannot be returned. And Daniel whispers, barely audible, "You found me." The words simple, unadorned, carrying more weight than anything else he could say, and Rex responds in the only way he can, by staying, by refusing to pull away, by anchoring himself to the man he once followed through places no one else would willingly go. And the handler stands frozen, unsure whether to intervene or allow what is unfolding to continue, because this is no longer a standard interaction. This is something else entirely, something that does not fit within the lines he has been trained to enforce. And the guard near the wall shifts again, his posture less rigid now, his gaze no longer detached, as if even he can feel that something has shifted beyond procedure, beyond rules, and time, which had been ticking so loudly before, seems to fade into the background, reduced to something distant and irrelevant, because in this moment, there is only connection, only the quiet restoration of something that was never truly broken, only hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding and distance. And Daniel lifts his hand slightly, tracing along Rex's collar, feeling the worn leather, the small imperfections that tell their own story. And for a brief second, his fingers pause, as if recognizing something else, something subtle, something that does not belong to memory alone. And Rex follows the motion, his head turning just slightly, his attention shifting not away, but outward, as if something in the room has begun to draw his focus, something that does not match the calm that has settled between them. And the change is small, almost imperceptible, but Daniel notices, because he has learned to notice everything when it comes to Rex, and his eyes open, not fully, not abruptly, but enough to catch the shift in the dog's posture, the way his ears angle, The way his body tenses just slightly, not in fear, not in confusion, but in recognition of something else entirely, something that does not belong, something that has been present all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And the silence that follows is no longer peaceful. It is charged, filled with a tension that no one else in the room has yet understood, but Daniel feels it, deep and immediate. Because if Rex has remembered him, then he has also remembered everything else, and that means the truth has just stepped back into the room with them. The shift is subtle at first, a tightening beneath Rex's fur, a stillness that does not belong to rest but to focus, and Daniel feels it instantly, the same way he once did in places where silence carried meaning and the smallest change could alter everything. And he does not pull away, does not interrupt, because he knows this is part of it, part of what Rex was trained to do, part of what made him more than just a companion, more than just a memory. And Rex lifts his head slowly, his gaze moving past Daniel, scanning the room with a precision that has not faded with time, his ears angling towards something unseen, something that does not fit the quiet that has settled over the space. And the handler notices it too, his grip tightening on the leash, his posture shifting from passive observation to alert control. Heel. He murmurs under his breath, a command meant to redirect, to ground, but Rex does not respond. Not fully, not in the way expected, because whatever has caught his attention is stronger than routine, stronger than repetition, and Daniel follows the line of his gaze, not with urgency, but with a calm that has been forged through years of trusting what cannot be explained right away. And his eyes land on the far side of the room, where the guard stands, still, composed, yet somehow different now, not in posture, not in expression, but in something less visible, something that cannot be named but can be felt. And Rex takes a step in that direction, slow, deliberate, the leash pulling taut again, and the handler steps forward, attempting to guide him back. "Stay with me," he says quietly, but the words carry less authority than before, because Rex is no longer anchored to him, not in the same way, and Daniel feels a flicker of something rise in his chest, not fear, not yet, but recognition, the kind that does not come from logic but from instinct, the same instinct that had once guided them both through moments where answers came too late. And Rex lets out a low sound, deeper now, more certain, not aggressive, not uncontrolled, but purposeful, and the room tightens around it, the air shifting as if everyone present can sense that something is unfolding beyond their understanding. And the guard shifts his weight slightly, just enough to register, his hand adjusting near his belt in a movement that might mean nothing to someone else. But to Rex, it means everything. And Daniel sees it then, the connection forming not through words, but through the shared language he and Rex had built over time. The way the dog's focus narrows, the way his body aligns, the way his breathing changes, and a memory flickers, quick and sharp, that same stillness from before, that same unspoken signal that something was not right. And Daniel leans forward just slightly, his voice low, controlled. "What is it, boy?" Not a command, not a question that expects an answer, but an acknowledgement, a bridge between what is happening now and what has already happened before. And Rex responds by stepping again, closer to the edge of the handler's control, the leash stretching to its limit, and the handler hesitates, caught between protocol and the undeniable pull of what he is witnessing, because this is not defiance, this is detection, this is something he has been trained to recognize, but not necessarily to allow in a room like this. And the doctor lowers his clipboard completely now, his eyes moving between Daniel, Rex, and the guard, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that no longer fits the original picture. And Rex stops a few feet away from the guard, his body angled, his head slightly lowered, his eyes fixed, and the sound he makes now is quieter, almost a breath, but it carries weight, it carries certainty, and Daniel feels it settle into place inside him. The missing piece, the detail that had always been just out of reach, and he does not look at the others, does not seek confirmation, because he does not need it, not anymore, and the silence that follows is no longer uncertain. It is heavy, filled with something undeniable, something that has been waiting beneath layers of assumption and distance, and in that silence, the truth begins to take shape, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, steady force of something that refuses to stay hidden any longer. No one speaks at first, not because they do not have words, but because whatever is unfolding has moved beyond language, beyond procedure, into something that demands to be felt before it can be understood. And Daniel remains still, his eyes fixed on Rex, not on the guard, not on the others, because he knows that the truth will not come from arguments or raised voices. It will come from the one presence in the room that has never learned how to lie. And Rex holds his position, unwavering, his body aligned with quiet certainty, his focus locked onto the man across the room, and the tension builds not in noise, but in stillness, in the way every breath seems to carry weight, and the guard shifts again, this time less controlled, his composure thinning at the edges in a way that is almost imperceptible but enough. Enough for those who are watching closely, enough for Daniel, and certainly enough for Rex, whose instincts do not rely on appearances, whose understanding moves deeper than surface calm. And the handler finally steps forward, his voice careful but firm. "Something is wrong," he says, not as a question, but as a realization forming in real time, and the doctor glances toward the guard, then back to Rex, as if recalibrating everything he thought he knew about this moment. And Daniel exhales slowly, his voice steady, carrying no accusation, only clarity. He remembers, he says, not explaining further, because he does not need to. Because the meaning sits plainly in the air, undeniable, and the guard opens his mouth as if to respond. But the words do not come, caught somewhere between denial and the growing weight of what cannot be dismissed. And Rex takes one final step forward, closing the last distance allowed by the leash, his presence now impossible to ignore, and he lowers his head slightly, not in submission, not in fear, but in confirmation, a silent declaration that what he senses is real. And in that moment, the carefully constructed version of events that has surrounded Daniel begins to fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet inevitability of truth rising to the surface. And the handler reaches down, his hand brushing along Rex's collar, not to restrain, but to steady himself, because even he can feel it now, the shift, the undeniable alignment of instinct and memory pointing in a direction no one expected. And the guard steps back, just half a step, but it is enough. Enough to break the illusion of control, enough to reveal that something beneath the surface has been unsettled. And the room reacts not with panic, but with awareness, a collective understanding that what was once certain is no longer fixed. And Daniel does not look away, his gaze calm, unyielding, because for the first time since that day, the weight he has carried is no longer his alone. It has been seen, recognized, brought into the open by the one witness who could not be persuaded otherwise. And time, which had once felt like an unmovable force counting down toward a single outcome, now feels different, not reversed, not undone, but interrupted, as if the path ahead has shifted just enough to allow something new to emerge. And Rex turns his head slightly, looking back at Daniel, his expression softer now, the tension replaced by something familiar, something that belongs not to duty, but to connection. And Daniel reaches out once more, his hand resting gently against Rex's neck, grounding himself in that presence, in that loyalty that has endured beyond distance, beyond doubt, beyond everything that tried to separate them. And the silence that follows is no longer heavy, it is full, filled with the quiet understanding that sometimes truth does not arrive through evidence or argument. Sometimes it arrives on 4 steady paws, guided by instinct, by memory, by a bond that refuses to be rewritten. And as the room slowly begins to move again, as voices return, quieter now, more careful, Daniel closes his eyes for just a moment, not in relief, not in victory, but in something deeper, something closer to grace. Because whatever happens next, whatever decisions are made beyond this room, one thing has already been restored, something no verdict could take and no system could fully define. And when he opens his eyes again, Rex is still there, still steady, still present. And in that simple truth, there is more justice than anything that came before.